April 1st, 1945. Okinawa, dawn. Sergeant Ichiro Nakamura of the Imperial Japanese Army crouched in a bunker dug deep into the coral ridge overlooking the landing beaches. He had faced American attacks before, at Saipan, at Leyte, at Peleliu, but what he saw that morning was different. The sea below churned with ships, an armada larger than anything he had imagined. Suddenly, the horizon erupted. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, hundreds of naval guns opened fire at once. Behind him, the ground convulsed, as if the island itself were splitting. The roar was not a sound, but a physical force that shook his chest, rattled his teeth, and seemed endless. Nakamura thought it was a prelude, a short barrage before infantry charged. But the shells did not stop. They fell for hours, then days, then weeks. Everywhere he turned, there was fire, smoke, and thunder. He realized with horror that America had brought not just men, not just tanks, but a storm of artillery so vast that resistance itself seemed futile. For Japanese soldiers trained to believe courage could overcome any weapon, Okinawa was a nightmare. The U.S. invasion force brought 1,500 ships, 180,000 troops, and the heaviest concentration of artillery in the Pacific War. 15 battleships, 9 cruisers, and 38 destroyers fired nearly constantly, joined by hundreds of field guns and rocket launchers on land. By the end of the battle, American artillery would fire more than 7 million rounds, more shells in 82 days than the U.S. Army had used in the entire 4 years of World War I. The defenders of Okinawa, 77,000 strong, were buried under a rain of steel unlike anything they had ever imagined. The Japanese strategy was to fight from caves and tunnels, conserving strength for counterattacks. General Mitsuru Ushijima ordered his men not to resist the initial landings, but to bleed the Americans inland. Yet even in caves, they were not safe. Heavy naval guns blasted openings, collapsing tunnels. 155mm howitzers poured fire into ridges day and night. For the first time, American forces deployed massed rocket artillery in the Pacific. Sherman tanks, fitted with T-34 Calliope launchers, unleashed hundreds of rockets in seconds, saturating slopes with explosions. Soldiers who had endured machine gun fire, grenades, even flamethrowers now faced a constant bombardment that destroyed morale before battle even began. One lesser-known fact: the Americans used sound-ranging equipment and radar to pinpoint Japanese guns. Whenever a Japanese artillery piece fired, microphones triangulated its location. Within minutes, counter-battery fire obliterated it. Survivors noted bitterly that every time they pulled a trigger, death arrived in return. By May, Japanese artillery on Okinawa was nearly silent, not because the guns had been captured, but because they had been destroyed the moment they spoke. The psychological toll was immense. Diaries recovered after the battle described the despair. One corporal wrote, "We cannot fight. The earth itself explodes. The sky falls every hour." Another recorded, "We hide in caves, but the fire finds us. We have no air to breathe." Soldiers began to dread the sound of incoming shells more than the sight of advancing infantry. Many chose suicide rather than endure endless barrages. The scale of naval bombardment alone was staggering. The battleship USS Tennessee fired 20,000 shells in 1 month. USS Idaho fired so many 14-inch rounds that her gun barrels wore out and had to be replaced. Destroyers rotated positions daily, hammering coastal defenses. Marines advancing inland joked that they had artillery support every 50 yards. Japanese soldiers trapped in caves did not laugh. They spoke of the bombardments as Jigoku no Ame, the rain of hell. Another little-known detail: the Americans even used chemical smoke shells to blind Japanese observers. For hours, ridges were shrouded in white haze, making it impossible to direct fire. Then, without warning, the smoke lifted and another barrage followed. The rhythm broke the spirit. "We cannot see. We cannot move. We cannot breathe," one survivor wrote. "This is not war. It is annihilation." Industrial numbers again told the truth. By 1945, American factories produced 40,000 artillery pieces and millions of tons of ammunition annually. Japan, strangled by blockade, could barely supply shells for its remaining divisions. At Okinawa, U.S. forces fired more shells in a single day than Japan manufactured in a month. German observers stationed in Tokyo reported home before Germany's surrender. The Americans wage war by mathematics. They overwhelm with fire until nothing lives. The psychological shock extended to officers. General Ushijima himself admitted privately, "Our men are brave, but bravery cannot stop steel." His chief of staff, General Isamu Cho, urged banzai charges to break the stalemate. But every massed attack was pulverized by artillery before it began. On May 3rd, a desperate Japanese counterattack collapsed under naval and land fire so devastating that survivors described hills turning to liquid mud. Out of 7,000 attackers, nearly all were killed. American casualties were under 1,000. It was not a battle. It was slaughter. Another overlooked aspect. Okinawa introduced massed rocket artillery to the Pacific. The Navy deployed LSMR rocket ships, small craft bristling with launchers, firing thousands of rockets in minutes. On April 1st alone, they unleashed 30,000 rockets in support of the landings. Japanese defenders, used to shells whistling overhead, were stunned by the sudden shrieking roar of hundreds at once. Survivors wrote, "It was as if the sky itself was on fire." The human cost was catastrophic. Out of 77,000 Japanese defenders, only a few thousand survived. Most were killed by artillery and bombardment long before they saw an American face. Civilians suffered too. Over 100,000 Okinawans died, many in caves struck by shells. For survivors, memories of endless bombardment eclipsed all else. One civilian recalled, "The ground shook until we thought the island would sink. We prayed for silence, but the guns never stopped." For American troops, the artillery was salvation. They still faced fanatical resistance, kamikaze attacks, and bloody infantry fights. But artillery leveled defenses that would have cost tens of thousands more lives. Marines advancing on Shuri Line often called for fire support and watched entire hillsides erupt in flame. Soldiers who had dreaded close-quarters combat with Japanese defenders gained confidence knowing that behind them stood the greatest artillery force ever assembled in the Pacific. The industrial contrast was humiliating for Japan. While Americans stacked shells by the millions, Japanese gunners rationed to a handful per day. One Japanese artillery unit entered battle with just 30 rounds per gun, enough for 1 hour of combat. When Americans discovered captured depots, they laughed at the meager supplies. To the Japanese, it was tragic. "We bring swords to face thunder," one officer wrote. By June, Okinawa was a wasteland of craters, smoke, and shattered bodies. The constant artillery fire had not only destroyed the army, but broken the will to resist. Survivors fled deeper into caves or surrendered, something unthinkable months earlier. Even fanatical officers could not inspire courage against fire that never ceased. The legacy of Okinawa haunted Japan's leaders. They realized that if Americans invaded the home islands, artillery would pulverize cities and armies alike. Combined with firebombing from the air and blockade at sea, it left no hope. For Japanese soldiers who survived, the memory was not of glorious battle, but of endless, inescapable thunder. One final statistic reveals the magnitude. In 82 days, American artillery fired 1,000 tons of shells per day. That is more weight in explosives than Germany dropped on Britain during the entire Blitz. To Japanese soldiers, stunned by this arithmetic of destruction, the conclusion was unavoidable. Courage could not prevail against mathematics. For Sergeant Nakamura, crouching in that bunker on April 1st, the war ended not in a duel of swords or a clash of infantry. It ended in fire, smoke, and the roar of guns that never stopped. He survived, but in later years admitted, "We never saw the Americans. We saw only their shells. The island died under artillery."